Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Jonah Lupton, and you're listening to Startup Sense. So today's guest, to me, is pretty exciting. We have Philip Williams. He's from Arizona. Philip is a longtime serial entrepreneur and businessman. Back in the beginning of his career, he climbed the corporate ladder, working in manufacturing, distribution, engineering, consulting, professional services, and a few other industries. He's a three-time Inc. 5000 honoree after becoming the CEO of a 17-year-old cash-strapped startup, or company, not really startup, a company, and growing it 50% a year for 5 straight years, which resulted in two nearly simultaneous acquisition offers from publicly traded companies. He's accomplished by bootstrapping, no outside money taking. He's bought and sold a few companies over the years, been through the highs and lows like most of us, and it's that experience that makes him a valuable consultant nowadays. He likes to help small businesses build more profitable and respectful companies through his consulting firm at askphilipwilliams.com. And that's kind of how we actually connected through Twitter. I went to his site, saw some of the cool stuff he was doing. We connected, and here we are talking on the show. So Phil, how you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Jonah. Thanks for that amazing introduction. You make it sound so nice and fuzzy.
I'm just glad I didn't screw it up too bad. So there are, Philip and I actually were on the phone for over 3 hours over the weekend. And, so we know we have a ton of content that we want to pack into this show. This is actually going to be a longer episode than normal. We're probably going to go about 80 to 90 minutes, and then I'll split it up into two episodes. Typically my interviews are, 30 to 40 minutes. But I just think that Philip brings so much experience and kind of, real life advice from building businesses and helping other entrepreneurs build their companies. There's just a ton of stuff that we want to share. So Philip, let's just kind of jump into it, and we'll spend the first, portion of this show talking about your operating career. So, kind of take us back to, the first company that you became the CEO of. What kind of a company was it? How did that happen? And then just, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, it was actually a geophysics company, and they worked primarily with electrical methods, which is really odd given that my education is mechanical engineering, and I really don't understand electrical theory all that much. But what I was able to do is figure out how to market and turn what they were doing into a service that could really help people out. And the story is that, it was literally 17 years old when I walked in. I joke because I really didn't know if they were going to be able to make my first paycheck.
So this is okay. So obviously this is the cash strap company that I referenced in your bio.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that was where we started. We immediately, cash flow was a huge problem, and we were super tight. One client dominating our income statement and our profit, and from there, it was just day after day, solving problems as they came, and just making sure that each day cash flow got a little better.
So, what were the reasons, in your opinion, that you had to step into that situation? Why had the company become cash strapped? What were they doing wrong, and then what problems were you in a position to fix?
They had a few things going on. Like a lot of small companies, the founder is in there and they're working in the business every day. And one of the things that they weren't doing was selling on a regular basis. They had gotten themselves into the cycle of selling only when they had a revenue shortfall.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and exactly. There actually wasn't a salesperson on staff. They would all just kind of work the phones when they thought that they were going to have problems, paying their bills.
My God, that is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that I found out, one of the things that they did to keep the doors open about a year before I got in there is they had taken a loan from what the founder had called an angel investor, and the loan wasn't on the books. So
were they paying back the loan on a regular basis? Were they making payments?
No. no, it was totally off the books. It was literally the way that I found it was I found a $40,000 deposit and I couldn't figure out what it was for.
Jeez, wow.
Yeah. So
Why would they do it that way? I mean, I can't believe that their attorney or accountant recommended it.
because they weren't taking the advice of attorneys and accountants, which
Gee,
would be another mistake.
yeah, that's another recipe for disaster. Yep. I mean, those are the related expenses or costs of a business that you just can't avoid, and if you do avoid them, it's going to come back to bite you.
Yeah, I suppose one of the nightmare stories that we can talk about a little bit later in the show is the amount of money I spent fixing a contract that the founder negotiated on his own without the advice of an attorney.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure, especially once you get into the consulting world, you see some pretty dumb stuff.
I don't want to make too many people feel too bad about themselves. I get it. You come out of school, or maybe you didn't go to school, whatever, but you have a certain expertise doing something, whether that's writing code or geophysics or, how to plumb a house, whatever it is, you know how to do that, and you know how to do it really, really well. You don't learn accounting and bookkeeping and all that other stuff. And a lot of guys and gals start out with the idea that they're not trying to screw anybody, and they really do go into a lot of things with a handshake.
Yeah.
And I get it.
I've done that.
Unfortunately, yeah. Unfortunately, the problem is that deals break down, situations change, and you need the black and white. And so, that's how founders find themselves in these messes is, they do stuff out of a genuine goodwill, but then situations change and your counterpart on the other side changes their viewpoint, or the economics of the deal change, and then somebody gets, upset. And so,
yep.
But that's how it starts.
And even if you do the right legal stuff and accounting stuff, it's not to say the problems aren't going to arise down the road. You can't prevent every problem. You can't anticipate every problem that may arise, 3, 5, 10 years, after you've started the business. So, yep, we all get into those pickles. Would you say that this was the situation where the CEO, the guy that started the company, he just wasn't a salesperson? He just didn't have that sales mentality. He was more of a product guy or tech guy or whatever it might be.
Yeah, he was a fabulous scientist and engineer.
Okay.
And actually, at the closing table, he was really good. It's just that it's not what he liked to do first.
Right.
And that's another place where, as founders, it's super important for folks to realize what you don't like doing the most, and then probably the thing that you're worst at doing. And those are probably two of the functions that you need to get somebody else doing inside your business as early as you can.
Exactly. I think that's where you see some of the most successful companies were built by multiple founder teams, because each person on that founding team has, specific expertise.
Right. And the other piece, if you're a solo founder, is you have to be comfortable letting go.
Right. Delegating is hard.
Right. And when you bring the person on, you've got the other skill that you don't quite have yet is how to interview and find that person. They've got to be a good match for you. You want their skills to be complementary with a little bit of overlap. I find if there's too much overlap, then you'll find that the founder, and let's say the salesperson that they brought on, end up trying to do the same things, and other areas get left unattended. So it's a little bit of a delicate balance. Those first 2 or 3 hires are really important.
And I can see where if the founder doesn't really like selling, they're probably not a huge fan of recruiting either. So they probably have a hard time going out there and finding the right person to fill those positions. So how did they find you?
It was actually an acquaintance introduced us. And the interview actually took 8 months. I don't know what the typical is, but it was quite a long time.
That sounds like a long time.
Yeah, it was. Well, I was the first one. I was the first CEO that he was hiring. And he'd never done it before. And he really wanted to make sure that he got it right. On top of that, one of the other issues that he had was he had 2 guys working for him that he'd promised equity to, but he'd never executed on it. And so he was bringing in me, and so that's a deal we've got to fix, right?
Wow. So the cap table was so the two guys on the cap table that weren't providing any value to the business.
Well, they were actually working inside the business,
Okay.
and this is another theme that I've seen. Gosh, I don't know, a good handful of times in the last year, where you're talking to somebody and they've promised some kind of equity to an employee, and they've overinflated the value, or the employee in their mind thinks that it should be more than it is. And it's really nothing more than a promise, and everybody's functioning on the promise of equity, but nobody really knows what that is.
Yeah, that's a messy situation. There's no good way out of that one.
Yeah, and I see that a lot from founders who aren't out there getting advice. How much? What is it worth? Is it a buy-in? Is it a buy-in that's tied to some predetermined valuation? What happens when the valuation changes? All those questions.
Right. So how does a business owner in that situation, say it is a business that's been running for 15, 17 years, and it's doing what I don't know, call it a few $1 million a year. I'm just throwing these numbers out, but make it more than that. Make it $10 million a year. How does that business owner give a fair valuation to that company if they're going to give out equity that's based on a valuation? How do you do it?
Are we talking about going back and making good on a promise that's 5 years old, or are we talking about rolling out the idea right now today?
I would say both. Let's see. Let's try to cover both if we can, because I'm sure there's.
Okay, so if you've got a guy that let's say he's been with you 7 years, and 5 years ago you made a commitment to him. The first part is the two of you need to sit down and have a conversation, and you need to open up with the idea that, hey, I've made this promise to you, and I want to make good on that promise, and I want to make sure that we're on the same page with what that means. And if you've promised numbers before, now's a good time to talk about them.
Yeah.
Get all the cards out on the table. Don't leave that conversation saying, yeah, okay, you're going to get the 10%. Or whatever it is that you promised. But first, let the person know that you want to make good on the promise, and you need to understand and make sure that you guys are, somewhat on the same page. You may or may not be on the same page. There's a good chance, oftentimes, that you're not. What I find is that founders have a number in their mind that is smaller than the employee has in theirs. Right? We're all very happy and proud. The next piece is, let's say the promise is 5 years old. So you need to go back to your accountant, and you need to ask him to give you a valuation on the business 5 years ago. Okay, so you're backdating your valuation, and he may look at your balance sheet and your cash flow statement 5 years back and say, well, at the end of 2011, you were doing $328,000 in revenue, and you had $15,000 in profit. So, your valuation, I'd cap it at probably, based on debt, let's just throw out easy round numbers, $50,000. Okay? Well, if you promised the employee 10% of your business, what you were promising him on that day was $5,000. Okay?
Right.
Now, it's grown up. Let's say we're 5 years down the road, and now the business is $1 million. And, if the multiples have changed, depending on what your profit and everything is, your valuation today could be different. If he comes back, if your accountant were to say, you're going to want to do this, what's my valuation today? If the accountant comes back and says, well, assets, free cash flow, you're worth $350,000. So now you have a $35,000 commitment to your employee. All right, so now you start to understand the difference. The next part is, was that money or was that commitment to your employee a gift, or was it a buy-in? And that's a super important question, because if you're going to gift him $35,000, you've just created a taxable event for him. And
which is what most startups do. Most startups are gifting stock to their early employees, correct?
right, but a lot of times they're doing it in a much more formal way,
Right. Oh, for
right?
sure.
If you're funded by an angel or you've gone out and gotten your first round from a VC, they're not going to let you have these sorts of loose ends laying around.
Oh,
Everybody wants to know who's got equity.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. The cap tables. I mean, the investors are going to keep track of it. The founders are going to keep track of it, and there's software out there now that makes it really easy to keep track of it too.
Right. Exactly. Who could be diluted, who can't. You want to know if you're going to get watered down.
Right. Right.
And
I mean, because also down the road, I mean, as the company grows up, there's going to be employees that are going to want to exercise some of their stock options every year, and those are taxable events. So they have to know what the taxable consequences may be.
right. So then you have to decide, okay, so you're giving this guy shares in your company, and the value of those shares is worth $35,000 today. The next thing you've got to do is you got to go sit down with your attorney. And you need to explain to your attorney what you did 5 years ago and that you want to make good on it today. And you need to have a shareholder agreement drafted. And you need to be prepared, and you need to allow that employee to take that shareholder agreement to their legal advisor. Okay, this is not something that you ever want to put in front of them and say, sign it or you're out. If you don't give them a fair chance to go have somebody else read it and tell them what it means, then that's not very square. So the other super important piece that has to go in that shareholders agreement is the formula for the valuation. If that is not in there, you're leaving a whole lot of empty space open for interpretation.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of shareholder agreements that don't have that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot too. I mean, I've personally, most of the shareholder agreements that I've had drafted for my companies, I don't think I've ever had the formula in there for valuations. So,
and here's the thing: contracts can be changed. You and the person that have signed the shareholders agreement can agree to a different valuation formula down the road, but you have to have something to start with.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Right. And then definitely, shareholder. I mean, I've seen this where the founders, they start the business and they say, okay, I own 30%. We all own 33%, but they don't really have anything in writing, that line, outlines it, and then they also don't have vesting agreements. So they start the business with their two buddies and they each get 33%. And 6 months later, one of their buddies takes off to go work on something else. Now, maybe if they didn't have a shareholder agreement, it's better because they can kind of redo the cap table. But if they do have a shareholder agreement with no vesting agreement, that guy owns 33% and he's no more, he's no longer putting any value back into the business. So there's all kinds of ways to screw up on this stuff.
Right. And there's some other important steps here. Okay. So let's say you and your employee, you do come to an agreement and everybody signs the shareholder agreement. The other big question is, what happens when that employee quits? Who can they sell those shares to?
Right. Yep.
Because you might not want your employee walking out the door, quitting, and having the ability to give 10% of your company to your not-so-friendly competitor down the street.
That's a good point. Yep.
Right? Which means they all of a sudden might have access to your intellectual property.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Because as a shareholder, they're probably entitled to, certain, proprietary financial statements and stuff like that.
Right. So now here's another important element. When you bring on somebody as a shareholder, if it's a key employee, you're now introducing this concept of fiduciary responsibility. And you get into a lot of different things. The employee might say, well, I think I'm worth 40%. Well, all right. You want to go in and co-sign on all the bank loans that my name is on? Well, no. So you start getting into those kind of conversations, and so you're going to want to understand and talk with your attorney and your accountant about all of these different kinds of situations, because it brings into play a lot of different situations. You have to have your books have to be squared away every year, and that employee who now has 10% of your business is entitled to look at them. And so you need to be, when you offer somebody 10% of your business, realize that you're getting married to them.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people think about the long-term effect of it. They know they're starting a business. They know they can't pay their early employees, market rate salaries. So they give them some stock to kind of subsidize the salary without really thinking about the long-term ramifications, I guess, of having that person own a piece of their business.
Yeah, you just got married. It's the business, it's the financial equivalent of getting married.
So let's talk about, let's get away from kind of this stuff for a little bit. Let's go back to, operating the business, operating this company that you took over that was cash strapped. What did you do to right the ship? What big changes or hard decisions did you have to make to get that company back into the green or the black?
One of the things that we were really fortunate about is that we had a lot of resources, both in people and in assets in the business, that we were able to put to work.
Okay. How big of a company was it, headcount-wise?
At the time, we were 11 people.
Okay.
All right. But we were running really inefficiently. And so they tended to operate the business from a position of comfort rather than working toward the profit statement, right? And when you work from the position of, well, I don't really want to get up until 10 o'clock this morning, that's not such a good thing. If you don't want to hustle, that's not such a good thing. That actually adds inefficiency into your business. And so one of the things that happened for us very early on was we had a decent brand amongst the client base. We had a decent brand, and people would call us for work. And I'll never forget this. We had a company back east call, and they wanted to slot in a job. And they were willing to pay double our going rate to have us come out and do the job. They needed it done within 30 days. And one of the would-be shareholders and project managers in the company came to me and he says, "We can't do it. We just don't have the people." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I don't really know if that's true. Meet me in we call it a space called the bullpen. Meet me in the bullpen in a half an hour with every project that we've got going on for the next 3 months, a list of the people that are going, the equipment that has to go on those projects, and we'll talk about the equipment and the people that we need for this project." Half hour later, we met. An hour after that, we'd figured out how to slot this project in without going out and hiring more people, without going out and buying more equipment. And so for them, one of the really important things was to learn how to get lean and how to make stuff fit in. And that meant a little bit of, discomfort for them in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I guess whenever you're forcing the company to kind of, work at a higher productivity level, it's going to take there's an adjustment period to that.
Right. And, you use up a little bit of credibility too, really quickly if you're wrong. So, there's a lot of that going on. So that was actually what got us, the end of that first year took us from eyeballing about a negative 5% profit to making a 2% profit that year.
Okay. So then going forward, what were your plans to, increase revenues and then continue to increase the profit margins?
The following spring, I brought on a sales guy.
Okay.
That was the very next thing we had to do. We had to get somebody selling for us around the clock every day of the week.
And sales fixes a lot of problems.
Sales fixes a whole lot of problems, and having continuous revenue. And we also set specific goals. We were not diversified in our client base. We were not diversified in our income statement. And so the salesperson was actually told, you cannot sell into certain markets because we're already good there. We need to sell into other markets and be balanced if there's an economic problem.
What would you say, like your top 5 to 10 clients, how much of your overall business do they make up?
When I walked in the door,
Yeah.
When I walked in the door, the single largest client was over 90% of revenue. And
Wow.
the single largest project was over 80% of revenue.
Holy smokes. Yeah, that's risky. If they walk away, the company's going bankrupt.
Right, which is one of the other issues. There's a lot of businesses out there that operate for a number of years where they have one client that really just feeds them and keeps them alive. And they do all right and they make a nice living. The issue is that what I tell people is if that's the situation that you're in, you are not a standalone company. You are a glorified department or division of somebody else's business.
Yeah, right. That's so true. It's a good way to look at it. I mean, that's a risky way to run your business. The other risky part, or just maybe not risky is the right word, but insane, is to have a bunch of unprofitable clients. And I just think that comes down to the business owner not knowing their numbers, not knowing their metrics, not keeping tight enough numbers or controls on the different departments, and to let certain clients become unprofitable to the company is a big no-no as well. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that too, right?
Yeah, and where you see that is the client. You see that typically with their larger clients.
Yeah, because they're afraid to raise the fees because they're afraid they're going to leave.
Right, because you give, right?
Yeah. You keep servicing
and
you over-service them.
Yeah, the conversation that I have with people is, well, do you think that, this client would be happy to hear that they're subsidizing your other client? Client A, call up client A and tell them that they're covering all of the profit that client B should also be covering.
Yeah.
That's not a very reasonable thing to do. And, if you find yourself in a spot like that, I think what you're saying is true, Jonah. How you get there is, one, you don't pay attention to your numbers. Are you doing a monthly close on your numbers every month? It is not a good month just because you made payroll. The second is, do you break down your profit and loss statement, not just at the company level, but do you break it down by your product or your service? And do you break it down by client? And if you do those three things, if you look at those three income statements, if you will, every month, the company's income statement, the product or profit line income statement, and the client income statement, you'll very quickly figure out what's going on and where some of your opportunities are.
Now, with a company, less than 25 employees, whose job or responsibility would it typically be to keep those numbers and track them and update them?
So the founder or the CEO needs to have those numbers. What I tell everybody is you better have those numbers on your desk by the 10th of every month.
Okay. I mean, there's software now that makes all of it so much easier.
Oh, goodness sakes! If you're traveling, there's no reason why your bookkeeper, if you're running let's say QuickBooks, they can export that as a PDF and put it in your email.
Right. I mean, even nowadays, like you set up an e-commerce site on Shopify. Even they could track those numbers for you. I mean, it's very easy to export these numbers into spreadsheets and mix and match the columns until you get what you want.
Right. And so, but that's the thing about that 10th day every month. That has to be to miss that date has to be unforgivable. And probably the single largest impediment to getting there is actually the founder not getting their receipts, their expenses to their bookkeeper or their accountant on time.
Right. Okay.
So it's a kind of a garbage in, garbage out rule. I'm by telling you, look, your bookkeeper has to have this information to you by the 10th. That means that you have to have that information to your bookkeeper, by the last day of the month or the day after, the first of every month.
Now, for a small business, what do you typically recommend for bookkeeping services? Do you Should they have someone that comes into the business, 5, 10, 15 hours a week, or just use some kind of third-party independent company?
I've seen it done several different ways that are all good and workable. I have seen companies with on-staff bookkeepers. That works if you're running your own payroll. If you're sending payroll out to, a payroll service like Paychex or ADP, somebody like that, you have a little bit of a lesser need for an on-staff accountant, or you might get somebody to come in part-time for you. There are plenty of very good accounting firms in most major cities.
Oh God, yeah.
In America that have, you're talking 20, 30 person accounting firms that have all of the skills that you need and can do this for you. So there are a lot of different ways to do it. The important thing is to find an accountant who understands how important it is that you have your numbers by the 10th of every month.
Yeah.
And if your bookkeeper or accountant doesn't understand that, start interviewing and get one.
And there's so many accountants out there that a lot of times you can find someone that has expertise in your specific industry. If you're running a restaurant or a retail store, there might be some little, I don't know, tidbits of information that someone that has experience in that industry is going to know that some other general accountant may not know.
Yeah, and you know what? Chances are, if you're a restaurateur, you know a few other restaurateurs.
That's
if you're
true.
in retail, you know a couple other people in retail. Start talking to them and asking them.
Yeah.
Who do you use? Accountants by nature are disciplined people, so I find that if your accountant says, "Well, I don't really want to be, held accountable for that," go find a different accountant.
Right. That's basically their job. I mean, as long as they're getting the right information.
Yeah. And they're just wired to be disciplined people. They're naturally organized. They're just really, that's part of the thing that attracts them to that business.
Like OCD. Yeah, super organized.
Yeah, a lot of times when I interview somebody for an accounting role, I ask them how organized their house is.
I mean, I've seen people that have really organized houses, but their car is a disaster. Like, it's weird.
We can get that's the first interview question when you interview somebody who's delivering product for your business. You go out to their car, and if it's a mess, they don't get the job.
There's empty Starbucks cups all over the floor. No, right. I've seen some people where their house is spick and span, but then it looks like they live out of their car. Like, it just doesn't make any sense how they can be so OCD in one aspect of their life, but not the other. Let's kind of, we'll finish up with the operating career. Then I definitely have a ton of questions I want to get back into on the consulting side of things. But so you helped turn around this business, hired a salesperson. What was where did you guys go from there? Is this the company that went into the Inc. 5000, right?
Yes.
Did you guys eventually sell the business?
From there, the whole idea was we needed to diversify our client base. And so we set the first target of splitting. We had revenue was dominated by government contracts when I got there, and we set the first goal. So this is the first part, right? Goal setting. We set the first goal. We said, look, we need to get half of our revenue coming from commercial clients. So basically industry. And from there, we want to start carving it down into even smaller chunks. So different companies within the commercial world, and we wanted different contracts within the government world. And 4 years later, the contract that we had that was 83% of revenue when I got there, that one program 4 years later, we'd grown so much, was down to 17% of revenue.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's without losing the contract, right? So it boiled down to setting goals. And so I brought on the salesperson and I said, here's the thing. You are not allowed to sell any government contracts, period. Don't waste your time on it. I'm not paying you to do that. I need commercial projects from mining companies, from large architectural and engineering companies. This is where we need to be. And so that was his directive. We tracked, in the beginning, we would go to conferences, that sort of thing. We tracked every sales lead back to a conference to determine where we were best spending our time. It's no different than if you run a website, right? If you run a website, you want to know which blog post pulls in the most traffic,
Right.
Which video pulls in the most traffic. Same concept here. Which conference, which piece of sales effort. We tracked every client to figure out where they came from. And we did more of what worked and less of what didn't. And that was the biggest discipline that we set for that. That discipline stayed in place for a good solid 3 years. And
I think there's a lot of businesses out there that is probably one of the main reasons they fail is they're spending money on marketing, but they're just not spending it in the right way or the right places because they're not tracking any of it. They're throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And that's not a very disciplined approach.
Yeah, our dollars were so thin. I literally had enough money to pay for the salesperson and his plane tickets for, about a year. And if it wasn't going to bear fruit, we weren't thinking that we were going to be able to go a second year. So we had to know, and everything had to produce. Every piece of equipment. So that was the next part. When I got there, if they wanted a piece of equipment, they bought it. There was no discipline with regard to determining the ROI on the piece of equipment that they were going to buy.
Right. Are you saying like in some cases leasing is the better option?
No, I'm saying that if they wanted something, they bought it. They didn't calculate an ROI. They didn't say, well, we've got 6 projects over the next 18 months. They're going to generate X amount of revenue. A part of the project budget goes to equipment, and those dollars add up to X. This piece of equipment is Y. What's the multiple? There was none of that. No.
You're essentially figuring out how quickly the piece of equipment is going to pay for itself.
Right. They were doing none of that.
Yeah. They just said, it costs $100,000. Okay, we got $100,000 in the bank. Let's get it.
Bingo. Never mind paying down your line of credit.
Right.
The other issue that we had was that it was it was a highly seasonable business. We had a lot of seasonality, and so each summer we needed to pay down our line of credit so that in the fall we had enough breathing room to make it through to the next spring.
Oh yeah, right.
And because we didn't want to lose key employees, we were dealing in a business where literally our assets went home every night when they got in the car and left the parking lot. And, we needed that talent and we didn't want to lose them and we didn't want them feeling insecure. So we chose them.
What have you found over your career, both the businesses that you were operating and then the companies you've consulted with, what have you found to be the most effective ways to retain talent, to retain key employees? Is it simply financial driven or, other ways to
money gets them to join you. They will leave you for a number of reasons that hardly ever include money. So I've always been more of a productivity manager. I'm not a micromanager, and I manage somebody to whether or not we get the results.
Yeah, if you have to micromanage people, you're hiring the wrong people.
Right, and that's what I always tell people is that if I have to tell you what to do or how to do it, one of us isn't necessary.
Right.
And the other thing is, I just don't think people function well when you're breathing down their neck.
Yeah. And they want to be challenged. They want to work on interesting projects. I think people get bored in the same role with the same job every day in and day out. So you need to give them new things to work on from time to time.
Yeah, and it's also letting them customize their job a little bit. I've never been afraid of that. And I think a lot of companies, maybe 10 years ago were. I think it's becoming a little bit more commonplace now. And I've also never been afraid of somebody telling me, well, I really only want to work here 2 years. Okay. I'm okay with that. And I've always embraced the idea that when you hire somebody, you get everything that's going on in their world.
Yeah, right.
I had a guy working for me a while back. His dream is to be a head football coach in college football. Okay, great, wonderful. So, man, once a week I made sure I talked football with that guy.
It doesn't scare you though that he'll never be fully invested in your company. He's always kind of, he might always be looking over his shoulder for that coaching opportunity.
If that's his life's dream, if that's what he wants to do, and he was already, coaching at the high school level, he's an offensive coordinator for a high school team. If that's what he's doing, that's what he wants to do. And he's always going to be looking for it, whether I make him happy or not. What I want is an open dialogue, because I want to know when he's going to have the opportunity to leave me. Because if it comes, let's celebrate it. It's good for him. It's what he's wired to do. But as the leader inside the business, it gives me an opportunity to know ahead of time when I have to go find his replacement. And that's what helps with the continuity in the business. Nothing causes more turnover than turnover.
I was listening to a podcast the other day. Jason Fried from like Base Camp and 37 Signals was saying that they encourage their employees to get involved in as many different activities and hobbies as they can, and in some cases they'll pay for it. Like if they have an employee that wants to learn how to play the guitar, they'll pay for that employee to learn to play the guitar because they think it makes them a better, well-rounded person.
Yeah, I read a blog post, I think it was late last week. After the new employee has been on board with you, I think it's 6 months or a year, you sit down and you write 3 career path development plans for the employee.
Wow.
Two of the plans are for the employee's future inside the business, and the third plan is how they're going to leave your business on their 3rd anniversary.
Are you serious? That's an interesting concept. I'd be curious to read about that one.
Yeah, and the whole idea was this. If you come to us and we help you advance your career, and that gets out, people, other high-end talent, that the A players that we all want to have, they're going to hear that we're the place that helped you grow your career, and they're going to want to come and work for us.
Good point.
And so they were not afraid of it. They embraced it. Here's what they're finding. Not everybody quits.
Yeah, right.
Right? When I got to that geophysics company, every single one of my employees was paid half the market rate.
Wow.
Half the market rate.
They just they just loved the company. They wanted to be there regardless of the money.
They loved it. I didn't beat on them about you getting exactly 40 hours out of them. And we did grow salaries over that period of time. Don't get me wrong, we had to, because people won't work half rate for their entire life. But they worked hard because they did appreciate the vision and the values of the business. It felt like family. We all cared about each other. We were all in it together, and their situation was improving. And I think when your business is stagnating and you're paying small wages and you start breathing down people's necks, you're looking for a turnover situation.
Yeah. So, then you're in trouble. No, I have heard stories like that. Companies in their very early days where people would take lower than market rate salaries because they either loved the founders or they just loved the vision of the company or the mission. Something really drew them to that company where they were willing to work for, dimes on the dollar, I guess, because they felt like if the vision was really going to, pull through in the way that they expected, they would make that money back someday.
Yeah. And people want to be a part of something. And if you can provide that, and if you can be transparent about how you're going to get there and what's going on in the business, you're going to keep people a lot longer. If you have their heart, you'll get their mind.
Right.
And so I think this idea that it's a little bit antiquated. I really see lots of different people talking about it. You hear about Tony Hsieh, you hear about Gary Vaynerchuk, this article that I read last week. More and more business owners are starting to understand that your employee has many interests, and you've got to embrace those. And the better you do at embracing those, the better you get at welcoming the discussion about what else they do with their life, the more likely you are to capture their heart. And if you can capture their heart, then you can start talking about your vision. It's the old, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yep, totally right.
That's really what it boils down to. And if you don't care about their personal vision for themselves, why should they care about your personal vision for your business?
Right. I mean, if you're not putting your people first, they're not going to, your company is going to suffer in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, we had guys that, we had a guy that played ultimate frisbee, and I worked around that. It seemed like he's in the playoffs every year. Great, go do it. Because you know what?
Competitive, super competitive. So there's ultimate frisbee leagues.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know what? Because when he was at work, the guy busted his butt like nobody. I got 110% out of him whenever he was there, and he was there the vast majority of the time. But occasionally he'd need, some time off to go do that. Go do that.
Some of those people that are the 9 to 5, there's other people that stay till 7 or 8 at night, and then there's some people that are the 9 to 5, and the 9 to 5ers are sometimes the more productive people. They've figured out how to get 12 hours of work done in 8 hours.
Right. And there are some people that just work a little bit weird hours. And if you're in a business where you can accommodate that, that's okay. And that's something that I think as a business owner you need to consider, especially with, the newer millennials. They don't equate their profession necessarily to being all of who they are. And they like to work kind of weird hours sometimes. So if you're in a position, if you own a business where you can accommodate that, then go ahead and try. It's not going to hurt you one bit. Obviously, there are core hours. Your teams need to have meetings. Your clients expect you to be reachable. Those sorts of things need to factor that in. But the old rigidity of 9 to 5 with a 1 hour or 30-minute lunch or whatever it was, that's kind of out the door. And I've personally never actually managed that way. I really, quite honestly, to me, punching a clock is so much about minutia that I really hate minutia. So that I think in some regards that's what allowed me to keep a lot of people in tough situations is I didn't worry about things that didn't add value.
I'm the same way. I'm sometimes more productive at 2 a.m. than I am at 2 p.m. So I tend to work weird hours. And if I need to get away from work and go to the gym or take a walk on the beach or whatever it might be to clear my head, even take a nap, whatever it is, just to kind of recharge and then get back to work when you're back in the mode.
Well, you may have noticed that I tend to communicate with you late at night.
Right. And weekends.
Yeah, so yeah, how do you keep people when things are tough? I think the first thing is you need to know their heart, and they need to know that you care about them as a person. And if you can do that, if you welcome hearing about the rest of the dreams that they have, because they're only with you 40 hours a week if you're doing a standard work week, and there's 168, so 3/4 of their life is not at your business. You gotta know their heart, and then it gets a lot easier. Welcome their other interests. It's like Undercover Boss. You ever watch that?
One of my favorite shows. Yep.
Yeah. What's your favorite part about it?
Oh man. That's a good question. Certainly I think when the CEO or the owner of the company is undercover in the business and he's just getting total brutal honesty from the employees, telling him the problems, the areas that someone needs to fix, because they're caught, they're destroying the kind of the culture or the loyalty of the employees. And a lot of times they're just sitting there like, the founder or CEO was just shocked. Like they had no idea that people felt this way. They thought their business was, running, super smooth. And here are all these employees, the people, that the core of the business that aren't happy. Um,
And
and then certainly at the very end.
Do you enjoy the closing meeting where they finally meet privately and they take the mask off?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And a lot of the time you find the CEOs investing in a dream of an employee, and that dream many times has nothing to do with the business.
Oh, like 99% of them nothing to do with the business. Right. So that's definitely my second favorite part is that CEO found whatever makes that employee tick, whatever keeps them motivated, whatever their passion is, whether it's a nonprofit that they give their time to, whether it's their kid that has a disability. I saw one guy that coaches, a basketball team, and the CEO bought him I think it was a new minivan. There was a couple where employees were actually homeless, sleeping in shelters, and the CEO or the founder of the company actually bought them a house. There's been some just incredibly emotional moments on that show.
Right.
I've shed a lot of tears watching Undercover Boss.
And what I'm saying is, you don't have to go out and buy houses, and you don't have to pay for people's college educations. There's a lot of different creative things that founders, CEOs can do. You can introduce that employee to somebody who has had a lot of success in that employee's dream field.
Right.
You can write the letter of recommendation for them to get into college. You can, maybe they got a little brother or little sister that's also interested, and let that kid come in and shadow. There are so many creative, low-cost ways to get the heart of an employee.
And I think that is one of the things when the takeaways from that show is once and regardless of whether it was a house or a college education or, buying them a car, even the smaller things, that employee is going to feel so much loyalty and love for that business. And they're going to work that much harder, to make that owner that much more proud of them.
Right. And then the second part is authenticity. This can't be fake, and your brand can't be fake. Like I said earlier, people want to be part of something. So they want to believe in the brand that they work for, and part of that is the relationship that they have with their manager or their founder or their CEO or whatever that person is. But the other part is the authenticity of what the brand is accomplishing. And if you're not genuine about how you accomplish your mission, people are going to see right straight through that in a matter of seconds. And
right.
And if you, the manager, CEO, whatever it is, the role that you play, if you're not authentic in your personal execution of that vision, they're going to see right through you.
And I think I think that's definitely one of the issues that, because all the companies on Undercover Boss are large companies, where the CEO or founder is working out of a corporate office. A lot of times, he's disconnected from the employees that are in the retail stores or the restaurants or the warehouse or driving trucks. He doesn't work with them. He doesn't see them on a daily basis. So, that show gives him just a true insight and an ability to connect with those people on a level that he's never connected with before.
Right. So as far as how do you keep people, that's always been my first part is I want to find out, what do you love to do? What do you do when you go home? What do you do on the weekends? And I'm very okay with helping your work life fit around that. And from there, it gets much easier. People will stay with you for a long time if they feel safe in you knowing who they are.
I mean, because high turnover to business can really destroy the culture, the morale. So I think that is an area that most business owners and CEOs fall short in. They're so focused on trying to grow the business that they don't pay enough attention to the people, to getting to know their people on a more personal level.
Yeah, it's extremely expensive, both in hard and soft costs, right? You don't want to pay somebody an extra $1 an hour. Well, that's $2,080 a year plus, a little bit of tax on top of it. So,
but that $2,000 could change their life in some cases.
Yeah, the $2,000 could change their life. But the other side of the coin is, what does it cost you in lost productivity? You bring in another person that is, $1 an hour less. So now you look at it and you say, well, I'm $4,000 to the good, but what did you lose in productivity while you were training that new person?
Right. And even maybe once you get them trained, they're still only producing at, 75% of what the other person was producing at.
Yeah. And, the other guy was a known quantity. And so, there's a lot of different pieces, but I find that probably my best tool has always been trying to know the heart and mind of my employee and being okay with what they do when they're not at work.
So let's talk about some of the businesses that you've been working with over the last year and a half as a consultant. What are the typical types of businesses that you get brought into? What's the situation? Are they bringing you in there to help grow revenues, to increase profit margins, to fix some other issue? Maybe they want to sell the business in a couple of years and they're trying to, boost up the valuation. What are you seeing?
Yeah. So what I've been seeing lately is folks that want to sell, but their business isn't worth what they thought it was because they managed it. It gave them a good paycheck, and they ran some personal expenses through it, whatever.
So did they get a valuation from a CPA or a business broker?
Usually what happens is they'll go out and get a business broker, and they tell the broker, well, I need to get X. And the broker tries to talk them off the cliff. And they're not successful, so they go ahead and list the business. One fellow I'm thinking of in particular listed his business and wasn't getting the valuation that he thought. He had a $5 million valuation in his mind, and he was paying himself I think it was about $350,000 a year. Tried to sell it, and he's getting $1 million offers.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big discrepancy.
Right. Well, the business broker is only going to try and talk you off the cliff so much, and then they're going to let the real world beat on you a little bit so that they're not the bad guy.
Right. It's the same as someone that's trying to sell their house for $900,000 when, the real estate agent's saying it's only worth $6.
Right. And so this is one of the folks that we talked about this weekend, Jonah, where, we really had to go in and analyze what it was he was going to need to do. So that's one person that I see is, they want to sell, but the valuation isn't the number that they emotionally believe the business to be worth, not mathematically, but emotionally.
So how do you work with someone like that? You have to dissect their business and give them some sort of a plan to increase the overall value of the business over the next couple of years, and you continue to work with them on a monthly or quarterly basis?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what we did. We went in and developed a plan and pulled back all of the different issues that we were finding. As an example, information was only stored in one location. It wasn't common knowledge. There was no second in command who had access to the information or knew where to find it.
This guy was definitely kind of a control freak, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His inventory was out of whack. He had a lot of inventory on stuff that was hardly selling and no inventory on stuff that was selling well.
Now, was that his mistake, or did he have a manager that screwed up?
No, that was purely his mistake. He wasn't offering enough control to anyone else for anyone else to make that mistake but him.
He was clearly paying himself too much. He was probably doing some screwy accounting. Um, I'm sure there was a
Yeah,
lot of
I like to call it ownership accounting.
right. Just running the books, running all your personal expenses through the books, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're running your wife's Cadillac lease through the books, even though she's not at the office, and sometimes your daughter's gas card while she's away at college, and there are some things that the tax code lets you do that just because it will let you do it doesn't mean you should do it.
Right. I mean, certainly if a
Um,
business has investors, those things are not going to fly with the investors.
right. Yeah. You will. That's the benefit of having it, or one of the benefits of having an investor is that you're forced to do things correctly at a very early age in the business.
Right. Or they'll sue
So,
you.
yeah, exactly. You can't lie about that stuff.
Right.
So that's one person where they're looking to do an exit, but the valuation isn't what they need it to be. Um, the other one that I'm seeing is folks that are frustrated. You got a lot of folks that after the last several years of the economy, they've been beat on so much that they're in a spot where they're not sure they want to keep doing this. So they're thinking about actually selling it and going back to corporate America
Wow.
because they've been nursing their wounds for so long.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, if the business is stagnant, if you lose that burning fire inside you, it does. It doesn't become fun. It becomes more of a, yep. Yeah. It's no longer your dream, I guess. It's more of a just get me the hell out of here.
Right, and those folks are also equally caught in a pickle. But those folks, it's actually a little bit easier because if you can get them to a place and show them how to operate the business in a really profitable way, then they have a choice. Do they want to sell it or do they want to keep it? A lot of times they're looking to sell it because they're tired of getting beat up, tired of the grind of trying to grow it, or maybe not being able to grow it for one reason or another. If they get it to a good place, they might actually decide to keep it. But that's a 2 or 3 year trip.
Right. Does it make sense sometimes to bring in business partners to take over some of the responsibilities that are really beating them down?
I think for most of them so far, it's been getting the right kind of employee in because they've been lean for a while. It's the wearing too many hats, working too many hours, and that's the grind that really wears them out.
Yeah. Burned out. Certainly happens to all of us.
Yeah, and
And when you're not making money, you burn out that much faster.
right, and you're struggling with, well, how am I going to get my money out of this thing? I just want to, go get a job, and I tried, and it's not all it's cracked up to be. So those folks they're looking for a little bit of a rescue as far as which way to go. They're a little bit of a crossroads.
Are they more real? Are they more realistic with the sales price? If someone was to come try to acquire their company, are they just they're ready to get out, so they're willing not necessarily willing to take any offer, but maybe more realistic about a sales price than your first scenario?
They're a little bit more realistic, but unfortunately, what they're trying to sell is a job,
Yeah, yeah.
and
So,
it's hard to sell jobs.
so unless the acquirer wants to come in and actually run the company themselves,
Right.
which you see sometimes, but not frequently.
Yeah. So and that's the difficulty. It's far easier to sell something where there's a manager in place or at least another key employee that's going to stay, and the acquirer is going to have the confidence that they're going to be able to run the business for the first 12 months, which is really kind of the scary part for any acquirer. And so some of these folks, they understand that they're trying to sell a job, and so they're looking to boost the valuation and set it up so that it's run, I'll say more professionally, but that's not really a nice way to say it, but something that is more robust, I guess, actually would be a better way to put it. And
maybe that acquirer, that new owner, brings some, different skills, whatever it might be to the company that the previous owner just didn't have.
right. And I I have people reaching out to me like, oh, I want to go get a business partner. Well, why do you want to get a business partner? Well, because I need help running this thing. I'm really running myself into the ground. Oh, okay. So it's not that you need the partner. The fundamental problem is that the business is working you to death.
Right. And most business partners don't want to come into a failing enterprise, or
Right.
they want to come into something that's growing. You things are going so well, you need help. Not they're going so bad, you need help.
Right. And then the other folks that are reaching out to me are the folks that they've been building for a while. They kind of got it off the ground, $750, $1 million in revenue, and they're trying to figure out how to make the next leap. And that's where, how you and I kind of first got introduced to each other. I said, well, I'm the guy that gets called in to help them fix the problems that occurred in the first $750,000.
Right.
So that they can get from, the $1 million revenue to the $3 million revenue mark, or, from 3 to 5. Because you accidentally create a lot of issues for yourself because you're so busy running 100 miles an hour. And it's kind of stalled out. It can't move because of its own weight. Things are a little bit inefficient, and so folks ask me to come in and I give them a different view of the business. And it's so much easier when a stranger walks into your company and says, well, what about this and what about that?
How many business owners, even if they call you in for help, what percentage of them are so stubborn that even though they know you're there to help them, they just have such a hard time taking advice from someone that hasn't been inside that business for years? Do they look at you as the outsider, like, oh God, I know we called this guy, but he doesn't understand our business. He doesn't work on the front lines every day with us.
Well, the way my filter is set up, by the time you get to me, you're actually pretty serious about whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So I do run into a couple of those folks, and I have had one in the last year where I said, you know what, we're not going to actually be able to work together. And it was one particular company where they'd actually talked to 2 consultants before they talked to me. And I got to asking them about the advice that those other 2 had given to them, and I thought it was all great advice. And I said, I think what you ought to do is go act on the information and the guidance that you were given by those other 2 folks, and then come back and see me. If you're still having problems after you've addressed those issues, then come back and see me, because those folks are giving you really good advice. But if you don't want to listen to their advice, then I'm not going to take your money either.
Yeah, in some ways, you can't help someone if they're not willing to help themselves too. If they're not willing to change, and adjust to new situations.
Yeah, because at the end of our engagement, I'm not going to be there anymore. So you need to own it, and you need to know how you got to where you got. If I just walk in and take your money and kind of fix your problem, but you don't really know how it got fixed, and you weren't willing to be involved in the solution, then the next iteration beyond that is going to be phenomenally difficult. You really won't have an idea of how to get to the next place you got to get to.
What is typically your length of engagement, or does it really depend on the severity of the problems you're trying to fix?
I typically do a 1-year engagement. I'll extend out to 2 if necessary. But most of my folks are 1 year. I do have a small kind of relaunch program that I do with folks. It's a little bit of an intimate process based on the process that I used when I went into the geophysics company. And that's a little bit of a smaller program, about a 3-month program. And it works pretty well. Essentially I give you the plan, but you have to be, a person that's action oriented. If you're fooling yourself, then I'm going to give you a great plan that will collect dust.
Yeah, if they're not willing to execute it, then it's all for nothing.
Yep.
And stick with it. I think that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is, after you finish your engagement with the company, if you looked back on them, and maybe enough time hasn't passed where you can't really do this yet, but if you look back on them, I wonder how many of them are, listen to your advice and continue to make improvements and stick with the changes, and they're a better company now, and then how many of them kind of reverted back to their old bad habits.
Yeah, I'm still, as part of that program, I actually have a call that I make to you about 6 months later. And we go through the plan again, and we compare the goals to where you're at. Talk about that.
Reminds me of that show Bar Rescue, where they do like a few months later they do a checkup on the bar, and sometimes the bar owner has gone back to their old bad habits. They put the old sign back up, and they're using the old name, and they go back to the old menu, and of course they're just they're a disaster again.
Yeah, and so I don't know exactly how it will work for everyone, but it's a lower level program, and you kind of got to meet different people where they're at. Not everybody has a budget to bring somebody on board for a year.
So the companies that you've been working with, most closely over the last year, let's call them in that $750 to $1 million revenue range. What have you found across the board? If there's any common thread here, what is holding them back from, being a $2 or $3 million company?
A vision tied to company goals, tied to individual goals. Easy.
Really? That's simple. I mean, in most cases, they have the right sales process in place. They have the right people. They have good products.
No, actually, not true. What I'm saying is that the thing that they lack is they don't have their vision for the business tied to the company goals, tied to individual goals.
Okay.
So they don't build it down. And so you get in and you might ask them, so, what's Joe do? Oh, well, Joe does X, Y, and Z. Okay, show me Joe's job description. Joe doesn't really have a job description. He doesn't have a written job description. Well, how does Joe know what he's supposed to be working on every day? Well, because I tell him. Oh, all right. So every single person in your business should have 5 to 8 things that they understand that if they work on those every week, every day, that rolls up to the company's goals, and all of that helps execute your vision.
Is this kind of like the jack of all trades, master of none?
A little bit, and I think what it is the founders come in. When you're in the $750,000 range, it's almost still manageable as far as headcount, right? You're at that place where you don't really have a department manager yet, but you kind of do, and you've not sat down and figured out, okay, what is everybody supposed to be doing? Because once you figure out what everybody's supposed to be doing, then you can start actually building systems around those people. When it's 4 or 5 people, you can still grab a hold of it with 2 hands. You know what I mean? But when it gets to a head count of, 11 or 12, you start needing other people to help you run it. How are those people going to run it if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing?
Right. I think big companies are good at putting people into, specific defined roles with goals and milestones and everything else. I think small companies just try to fudge it. They know they need more people, but, you got one person wearing 3 hats, another person wearing 4 hats, and they're just not efficient. They're not all headed in the right direction.
Right. And this is I kind of think of it as it's a little bit like business puberty. You're going from a small child to a teenager, and this is the place where systems become really important. Discipline, I guess that's probably the best word. Discipline starts to become very important. You can't fly by the seat of your pants anymore. When you're at 750,000 to $1 million, you got to stop flying by the seat of your pants. And that means that you have a written vision for your business. There's goals for it. Like I said, when I hired that salesperson, I knew exactly what he was going to be working on. And I told him what he could work on and what he shouldn't work on. I don't know that I see a lot of companies that are in the $750,000 to $1 million range that haven't defined that clearly for everybody, and that everybody knows the 5 to 8 things that they should be working on. If you have a guy that's supposed to be working on 12 key important things every day, he has absolutely no idea which one of those things is the most important. But if he has 5 things that he's supposed to be working on every day, then he knows which one is the most important.
Right. Makes sense.
Right. And so it's that discipline. And it goes back to things like we were talking about earlier. If you, the founder, have a vision for your business and a goal for your business, and everybody knows their 5 to 8 things that they're supposed to be working on, then you're more likely going to be the guy that's going to understand why I want you looking at your financials every month by the 10th day. Okay. The overarching word is discipline. And a lot of these folks haven't sat down and defined what they want their business to look like, and that's why they're stuck. And then they haven't figured out, okay, well, if I want it to look like this, I need to do these 4 things, which means that I need these employees to be working on each of these things. The first time I lined out one of these plans, and it took me 5 months, and I sat down and I went through every single person in the business, and I laid out 5 to 8 key things that I needed that person to work on for the entire year. And if they worked on those things.
Do the employees like that, you think? They like that clarity? They like having defined goals and objectives for themselves?
Yeah, it really helps. It really helps. Then they know what they're supposed to be doing, rather than the herky-jerky coming in every day or objectives changing. It feels more stable to your team.
Right.
Like they understand where they're going. It goes back to people want to be part of something. This is one of those ways that you communicate to them that they're going to be part of something.
And if you have a well-defined plan with objectives and milestones, it gives you something to benchmark them against. When you're doing their quarterly reviews, you can say,
right.
Okay, we set these 6 goals for you. You achieved 5 of the 6. Congratulations. What held you back from, reaching the 6th goal, perhaps?
Right. And it's interesting that you talk about doing their quarterly review. This goes back to discipline. In this $750,000 $1 million neighborhood, I don't find a lot of companies doing any kind of employee review at all, because they haven't given them objectives. It's so much easier to walk up to them, the week before Christmas and say, "Hey, Joe, really love you. Thanks for being here. We're going to give you a 50-cent raise this year."
Right.
We really like you. Please come back next year. Now you know why your business is stuck.
Right.
It's not a small task. The first time you do this, I promise you, it's going to feel like a lot of energy and a lot of work. But on the back side, you will really feel, a year after you've installed this, you'll look back and your business will have accomplished something. But setting it up, the first time I set one up, I had 15, I think we were about 15 employees. It took me 5 months.
Wow.
Because part of the issue was, one of the things that I see when I go in is you see little fiefdoms develop where the marketing guy has his goals and the operations guy has his goals. And invariably, marketing and operations are somehow in some place, they're going to have slightly competing goals. They just do. Your marketing guy, your sales guy, they want infinite resources available at all times, right? They want to be able to sell 1 million widgets right now and have them on the shelf at Walmart. And so that means that he's going to tell your operations or your manufacturing guy or whatever, "Hey, you guys ought to have 1 million of these on the shelf. Why haven't you made 1 million?"
Right.
And your operations guy is standing there saying, "Well, I have a budget." So part of it is going through and one of the things that took me quite a long time was trying to figure out, how do I get these folks to work together? And how do I set it up so that their goals don't compete with each other? Or in places where they do compete, how do I provide an incentive for them to work together to resolve those issues? Because you can accidentally compete or build competing silos inside your business, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, that creates distension amongst the employees for sure.
Right. And so that's really why it took me so long. I would literally work on it. I'd spend, a week or two working on it, and I would literally put it on the shelf and leave it alone for like a month. And I would come back and reread it after I'd totally forgotten everything that was in it and ask myself if it made sense. Because at the end of the day, you're going to unroll this thing. You're going to roll it out to a bunch of employees who have never seen it before. And it needs to make sense to them. So if it doesn't make sense to you after you haven't looked at it for a month, don't expect your team to automatically understand what you want them to do.
Do you think you can train someone to be a good manager, CEO, owner, or is it just a knack that people are, born with, or they've developed over the years where they either have those skills or they don't?
I think it's trainable. But you got to want to be the person. If you don't want to be the person, that's fine. In fact, I say trainable. Let's look at Michael Dell. That his investors brought in a highly seasoned COO to run that business. This is a long, long time ago, while he learned how to be a CEO.
Interesting.
On the other side of the coin, the guy whose business I ran, I was the CEO. He was the founder. He wanted to be the chief technology officer. He didn't want to do any of the stuff that you have to do to be a CEO. That wasn't fun for him.
Right, which is fine. Not everyone wants to be the CEO, as long as he can recognize it and bring in someone to fill that role.
Right. So it's okay to be the founder but not be the CEO. I think that some people have this illusion that, well, I'm the founder, so I have to be the CEO. No, not necessarily. If you can go find somebody that has a vision for your business and gets it and loves it and wants to build it, and they like it more than you, because that job's not a fun job. I mean, it does have some perks, but there's days where you would gladly not be the CEO.
Yeah, managing people is not easy.
Yeah, it's hard. Like I said, I just told you, I spent 5 months building out my first, management by objective program, basically.
Right. You get 15, 20 people, all with very different personalities, different work ethics, different goals. Absolutely. That is hard to manage.
But I think, yes, it is trainable. The biggest, most important question is, do you really want to be that person? Because that person is the center of every problem. There is no problem that gets to go rolling past your desk. And do you want to be the person that takes that call at 11 o'clock at night, when you're getting ready to get into bed because something went wrong?
So the businesses that you're working with most recently, how long have they on average been around? A couple of years, 10 years?
They vary widely. The oldest is at 15.
Okay.
15 years.
What about the newest?
4.
Youngest 4. Okay, so 4 to 15 years is when things are starting to go wrong or not going as well as they would have hoped, or they need to, clean up the balance sheet or clean up the personnel or whatever. Have you found any common themes in, I guess, problems that were probably created in the infancy of the company that were just never dealt with and then, festered for 5 or 6 years and then kind of came to the surface and blew up in everyone's face? Maybe it was a legal thing, accounting thing. Maybe it was just not having a defined sales process. Anything that companies really screwed up in those first few years that then came back to bite them in the butt?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, not using legal advice early on.
Okay.
When you're negotiating your contracts, I tell everybody that I talk to that's running a business, attorneys are far less expensive up front than they are on the backside. You could negotiate a deal for yourself that for 2 or 3 years operates just fine, and then as soon as the business conditions change, be that you have more opportunity or the person on the other side of the contract has more opportunity, or maybe the economics of the deal just overall fall apart because of nothing that either one of the two of you did. If your contract isn't written right for the state that you're in, for the relationship as you were trying to set it up, you could spend a lot of money.
Well, I mean, I think, websites like LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer, I mean, they're good and bad. They provide cheap legal services and, boilerplate templates and stuff like that. But, every business is different. Every business has its unique challenges. And I just don't think any of those boilerplate documents are going to help a business in the long run. You use them in the beginning because it's cheap. You set up an LLC in your home state or Delaware. You pay Rocket Lawyer or LegalZoom like $250 plus a state filing fee, and you get your operating agreement, your shareholder agreement, and it's just so generic. Your terms and conditions, and then 2 years later you find yourself in a whole bunch of boiling water because of it.
Yeah, I've always been a person that prefers custom legal advice and custom accounting advice. I have always preferred the ability to walk into my attorney's office and sit down and talk about a contract face to face and make sure that they really understand what I want. I want them to know my business, because if they don't, we've got an issue. I know that I have personally spent, $15,000 with 3 law firms in 2 states undoing the contract.
Jeez, that's brutal. I mean, yeah. I've yet to ever meet an entrepreneur in my life that built a multi-million-dollar company and did their legal documents on one of those websites,
I've not met anybody that does it. I mean, for a few things they're great, but by the time you get done negotiating a deal, it has so many little custom pieces to it that you need to understand, or you need your attorney to understand why it's written that way. And there are phrases in contracts that say, well, the person that wrote this contract can't be liable. That's kind of the little piece of it. But you know what? When you take your notes during your negotiation and you hand them to your attorney, it's really important for that document to really do and say what you want it to do. I have an MBA. I was the CEO of a company, and I'm going to tell you right now, it is really, unless you went to law school, you're not a trained attorney.
No, God, no. Right. I mean,
bingo.
You find a couple PDF documents on the internet, and you just, you copy and paste it and change a couple words. You're not covered adequately by no means.
Yeah. Assignability as an example, really important issue, especially if you think you're building your company to be sold.
Right.
If you can't assign the contract, the rights in the contract, if they're not assignable or transferable to an acquirer, your company isn't worth anything.
I've seen someone screw up that one. I've seen where an employee worked on a piece of software and they argued that they owned that software, that code, because it didn't assign the rights of it over to the company. I think it was. I'm no legal expert, but and then certainly founders. Like if you have multiple founders in a business and you don't get a custom legal documents, you are out of your mind. I don't care what the cost is. There's no excuse. That is going to come back to hurt you every time.
Well, that and when we hit our peak before the acquisition offer started rolling in, we were operating in 4 states and 2 countries on 2 continents. We had 3 different non-compete agreements with our employees, because it all depended on which state they were living in. So different states do things differently. You can't have a non-compete agreement in Arizona will almost certainly be wiped out in Colorado. because
We're California, right? Doesn't California not honor them too?
yeah, if you've never heard of it, you got to look up something called the blue pencil rule, where a judge can literally go into your non-compete agreement and literally line out the sentences he doesn't like and hand it back to you and say, okay, here's your agreement.
Wow. Wow.
So you got to know these things, and quite honestly, the best way to learn them is to get the attorney up front. They're always less expensive up front. I know that, maybe maybe you're paying your guy $3.25 an hour. I don't know, maybe you're paying him $5.25 an hour. It just depends on what market you live in. New York City, you're obviously going to pay more for an attorney than you are in, Dallas, Texas. And also depending on the size of the firm, are we talking about, like Manat, Phelps and Phillips out in LA that has, it's multinational with multiple, entertainment and corporate and all kinds of different divisions? Or are we talking about, a collection of 10 guys that are running a pretty nice little business?
Right. I've always leaned towards the smaller shops.
Yeah, but it's if you pay somebody $2,000 to help you negotiate a contract, that's a lot better than spending $15,000 on the backside to help you get out of it.
Totally. Yep. It is a necessary cost or investment, however you want to look at it.
Yeah. And, I've never run into an attorney that's a jerk. I've run into a lot of people that I've done business with that are jerks and make their attorneys do mean things to me. But it's not the attorney that's the problem.
Yeah, the jerk attorney is the guy that's, that's representing the guy on the other side of the table that is suing you for something because you didn't do your legal work right.
Yeah. So I think probably the biggest headache is folks that negotiate their own agreements and don't really understand the full impact of everything that they're doing, be that employee non-competes, or employment agreements or contracts with vendors. I built a 28-page vendor managed inventory agreement when I was in manufacturing. And let me tell you something. I spent a lot of time with attorneys on that deal. And I worked with 30 small businesses getting that contract in place. Every single one of those guys talk to their attorney.
Yeah, because that's another issue, right? You're going to have agreements or contracts with your vendors, your suppliers, your distributors, your manufacturers, your wholesalers, any of them, right? I mean, you need agreements, custom agreements with everybody.
Well, and especially, if you're a small business and you're coming in as, say, a vendor to a large company, you can bet your bottom dollar that they had an attorney look at their document. So before you sign it, you might want to know, are you signing up for consequential damages due to the acts of God? Because if you are, you better know it, and you better have an attorney explain to you what's in that contract.